The Ukrainian armed forces are putting both psychological and physical pressure on the Russian army, and the Russian troops are about to go crazy with fear from the situation they are facing. The Russian troops, unable to bear the weight of the war, act in the opposite direction with Putin's directives, and they either flee from the front or surrender en masse at every opportunity because Putin's directives lead them directly to a meaningless death. And now all of Russia is aware of this. Now Russian soldiers guarantee their lives by waving the white flag, even in hot conflicts. Let's take a closer look at the psychological collapse in the Russian army that drove thousands of Russians to surrender to the Ukrainian army with white flags and flee from the front. As the unrest within the Russian army grew, it turned out that most soldiers refused to fight and go to the front, while those at the front were waiting for an opportunity to desert or surrender. Tens of thousands of soldiers applied to the I Want to Live project for Russians ready to surrender. The soldiers sent to the front line had many shortcomings. Soldiers in the army did not have spare clothes and equipment. There was not enough ammunition in the war zone for these soldiers. But the biggest shortcoming in the Russian army was the lack of food stocks. At the same time, the budget of the Russian army was not able to finance the protracted war. These reasons were enough to infuriate the Russian soldiers. Faced with various problems, the Russians began to look for ways to save themselves. It was Ukraine that extended a helping hand to the Russians who wanted to surrender. Ukraine was trying to save the lives of Russian soldiers with a project. It started, according to the main intelligence directorate of the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. In March, more than 3,000 Russian soldiers contacted the I Want to Live Coordination Center on desertions. This figure is twice as high as in previous months. The increase in the number of Russians willing to surrender bears the traces of growing fear among Moscow troops. The factor that worries the Moscow troops so much is the upcoming Ukrainian offensive. Since September 2022, roughly 12,000 Russians have considered deserting and surrendering to the Ukrainian army. If the March doubling indeed reflects Russia's nervousness over the impending offensive, then it could be a symptom of a broader morale drop that bodes well for the Ukrainian armed forces. The I Want to Live helpline was established on September 18, 2022. The date was not accidental, as the Kremlin announced the partial mobilization of several 100,000 reservists on September 21st. As a result, at least 500,000 young people and mostly professionals fled Russia to Georgia, Kazakhstan, and other destinations. About 12,000 people contacted the Ukraine hotline. The first Russian soldier to desert did so on October 5. After October, approximately 1,400 to 1,500 Russian soldiers contacted the center each month. Russia responded by blocking this website. However, Russian soldiers can contact the center by calling the hotline or visiting a special chatbot Telegram or WhatsApp site. Alternatively, if Russian soldiers wish to surrender on the battlefield, the center advises them. If you want to surrender alone, remove the magazine and place the gun on your left shoulder with the muzzle pointing down. Raise your hands with a white flag and say "I surrender." Then approach the Ukrainian soldiers and follow their orders. How do they surrender in a group or unit? Turn off the engine of your armored vehicle and stand in front of it. Get rid of all your guns and send a negotiator who doesn't carry a gun and should carry a white flag. That's how simple it is to reach the savior arms of Ukraine. If the Russians want to live, they must try the surrender option when it comes to general military strategy. After last September, Moscow seemed to have gotten smarter. Russia's strategic decisions were finally beginning to make military sense. The partial mobilization of the reserve forces on the orders of Russian President Vladimir Putin in September strengthened the Russian forces at the front. But here, too, setbacks did not leave the Russian leader behind. As we all know, Vladimir Putin's partial mobilization decision caused Russian men to flock to the borders to escape from the army and Russia. The streets of Russia were filled with families who rebelled against this decision. However, it was the soldiers on the front line that dealt the biggest blow to the Russian leader, not wanting to sacrifice themselves for Vladimir Putin. Russian soldiers attempted mass desertions in addition to the desertions. The Russians even started to surrender to their rivals by laying down their weapons. The Moscow army was not sufficiently prepared for the war in Ukraine. Russian leader Vladimir Putin thought he had the most powerful army in the world. So, Vladimir Putin thought it would be pretty easy to take over all of Ukraine, confident of the strength of his army. The Russian leader almost threw his soldiers to the front line without going through a long preparation process. Despite the approaching Ukrainian offensive on one side and the Russian soldiers laying down their arms on the other, the Kremlin administration wants an operational breakthrough. Russian forces are trying to advance on Bakhmut. The war for the Ukrainian town is not over yet. Russian President Vladimir Putin is desperately seeking success on the ground to bring his special military operation in Ukraine to life. However, despite recent advances in Bakhmut, Russian forces are still looking for an operational breakthrough. Even if the Russian army and the Wagner group mercenaries succeed in capturing Bakhmut, the probability of an operational advance is extremely low. What is operational breakthrough? To begin, we must first define an operational breakthrough. What would indeed be an operational breakthrough for the Russian forces? To answer this question, we can look to Ukraine's surprise counterattack in September. Then, in the first days of autumn, the Ukrainian army launched a surprise counterattack in the area around Kharkiv, the country's second-largest city, which has been under siege since the beginning of the war. Using deception and violence of action, the Ukrainian army was able to repulse the Russian forces. Kiev troops liberated hundreds of square miles in the process. Ukrainian forces not only completely secured Kharkiv, Kiev and forces also liberated other important urban centers and logistics nodes in the east, including Izium Lyman and Kupiansk. The counterattack was able to shift the conflict from Kharkiv to the area close to the Russian border. In this process, Ukraine interrupted Russia's operations in the east and in the Donbass with a big move. The Ukrainian army succeeded in redesigning the operational map in the east. This is an operational breakthrough. It doesn't have to be an attack that wins a war. It just needs to make enough progress in the field to shift the balance in a given operational environment. Given this definition, it is extremely unlikely that Russian forces will make an operational breakthrough in the Donbass. So far, a Russian operational breakthrough is almost completely unlikely, even if the private military company of the Wagner Group has succeeded in capturing the town of Bakhmut in the Donbass. Russian forces do not appear to have the necessary mobile reserves to take advantage of it. But even so, the Ukrainian army prepared additional defenses to the west of the town. Indeed, the Ukrainian leadership used Bakhmut as a trap to wear out Russian forces. The Russian army and the Wagner Group special military forces spent a lot of troops and resources in capturing a town of little military importance. In the process, Moscow lost some 30,000 soldiers along the line of contact in the bigger picture. The large-scale Russian offensive largely failed, achieving nothing more than a few miles on land and capturing some settlements. In summary, when we look at the dynamics on the field, it is obvious that the conflict will probably continue for a while. The strategic decisions taken by the Russian leader in the Ukraine war did nothing but harm the Russian army. The disintegration within the Russian army increased day by day. It's a matter of curiosity how the army, shaken by the riots, can achieve success on the front line. We will see more clearly in the coming days how the revolts in the Moscow army will affect the front lines. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like our videos. Thank you for watching us.